I've been teaching at the Alembic. One of my secret plans with the Alembic is to create an environment that's fun for me to teach in and has cool students, or whatever. Students isn't the right word. People who want to come and hang out, think, read, listen, talk. Uh, so it's been going well. The class is called Zen American Style, and it's kind of, sort of my history of Zen in America, but I'm taking time to go into some of the ideas and complexities of it. It's quite a rich story, and I'm by no means on top of the whole thing, but it's been uh, it's been pretty rich, and I guess we're experimenting with having folks follow it online. We're actually doing something kind of inspired by what we do here. Here we record my talk and the meditation, and then we turn off the recording device so we can just talk and not have it be on YouTube or anything like that. And for the Alembic classes, I kind of wanted to make sure there was something you got for showing up in the flesh. So we've been streaming uh, the lecture, which has been about an hour, a little more than an hour, and then we take a break, and then we turn off the stream, and then people who are in the room, it's a little bit more like a seminar. We've been reading poetry and talking about it, and those conversations have been really great. I was surprised how much people wanted to talk. So I'm definitely going to kind of keep that style as I go forward. It makes sense. You have you stream a lecture. If you have any burning questions, you answer them at the end of the lecture, and then you create a situation where there's a little more intimacy. Because I've been really impressed over time how this environment, which is on some level kind of alienating, and we're all a little sick of it, and it's energetically draining in a certain way. I do these Zen retreats with my Roshi, and they're mostly online, and they're cool, but I'm kind of sick of them in a way, and I find them definitely way more draining than being in person, even if you have to commute. But at the same time, obviously, you get a nice vibe going, and it's it's pretty friendly. So it's a good thing to work at, in our mixed world. Anyway, so the thing I wanted to talk about tonight was sort of inspired by a point in talking about Zen and what made Zen appealing to Americans in the 20th century. And it has to do with reflecting on the category that we all use. It's a very significant category for us all, almost to the point of being kind of invisible, which is the idea of experience. That we have experiences, that we experience the world, and that there's something special about the category of experience in relationship to other ways of knowing the world. Knowledge, intuition, imagination, analysis, memory. And while all of those things we can kind of fold into the category of experience, because as some philosophers like to point out, all of our objective science is only enlivened and recognized and affirmed within our experience, our mental experience of the arguments, the data, the technologies, the patterns of nature. Like, on some sense, the category of experience is so large that it swallows everything else up. And that's a good point worth thinking about. Maybe we'll come back to it. But I want to stay with a somewhat narrower sense where we have the idea that there's knowledge about something, or there's representations of something, like in a movie or a text. And then there's our experience of that thing and how we privilege that category. And we can all just kind of think about it right now. When you think about experience, and why do you trust experience more than other modes? Do you have a desire to make sure you have certain kinds of experiences as you go forward in life, are there parts where in your life where you have a lot of knowledge but you don't have experience and you really want that experience? Um, if you do, if you have crafts of experience, meaning like ways in which you interact with the phenomenological unfolding of the world, uh, there's all these sort of different kinds of elements going on there. And obviously, it's extremely important when we think about both psychedelics and Buddhism, because even if, just to take this the second, or spiritual practice, paths or ways, is that even though there are ideas there, concepts, knowledges, understandings, that most of us are only there in the first place because we've had certain experiences, we want certain experiences, we're dissatisfied with aspects of our own experience, that the whole mode of experience in a way is completely inextricable from seeking, even if what we want and what we get isn't always just experiences. In fact, if they were just experiences, we might sort of, have run aground by now. Like there has to be something transformative, something that shifts fundamentally. And maybe those shifts register in our experience as we go forward. But oftentimes, and I think you'll notice this particularly in the last 20 years, as we've shifted towards what some people call the experience economy, is that the role of having experiences has become more and more fetishized and to some degree even commodified in recent years, where it's not about having something, it's about having this extraordinary experience and having the experience itself be kind of catered. And there's modes of travel that are like this, aspects of extreme sports are like this, aspects of party culture are like this, that there's a way in which experience itself has become, I don't know, it's a more complex category, I think, now than it used to be. But I want to come back to this point about commodified experience maybe a little bit later and take a step back, because I told a story, a brief story during the last Zen class or American Zen class about experience, and I kind of want to tell it again in a little different way, because it's such an important thing to understand. Because even as, and this is part of the paradox, is that for most of us, probably almost maybe all of us to some degree, experience is a fairly obvious category. It's pretty clear what it means. It's like, you don't have an experience, you have an experience. You don't know what Fernet tastes like, you taste some Fernet, you've had an experience of Fernet. Before you had the taste, you didn't have the experience. It's kind of obvious, like, and we think about it in a sort of transparent way. And there are reasons for this because of the phenomenological liveliness of experience and the legitimate belief that human beings have had this kind of aspect of themselves for quite a long time. It's easy to forget that our modern sense of experience, and even particularly our modern sense of spiritual experience, as something that you want, as something that is transformative, as something that tells you something that nothing else can, that all of that is also historical. It's also something very much about our modern world, how we've come to think about things, and it doesn't necessarily map quite as easily onto pre-modern culture and pre-modern people as we might think. Or at least it's worth becoming aware, critically aware of all the things that people put into experience in the modern sense, because it's, at least in my view, the way that I approach things, On the one hand, I'm very open to transformative experiences. They've fascinated me. I've been attracted to them. I've gone out of my way to catalyze them, seek them out. And yet it feels to me that it's also equally important to have a kind of critical register, a way of understanding or integrating or even critically analyzing experiences that becomes part of that seeking. And in that way, I think it's different than, some ideas you have, and this is very clear in contemporary psychedelics, where there's a kind of belief, if you look at the sort of rhetoric around healing and experience, that the experience itself essentially delivers the goods. That if you have the right kind of experience, a mystical experience, they'll even say, the more that the psychedelic experience is a mystical experience, the more likely that your healing process is going to work. So, okay, clearly we want something like mystical experience, but that's a really peculiar category. Like, where does that come from? Who defined what a mystical experience is? That's kind of interesting, right? So, and I think it more generally, and you can look at aspects of our contemporary culture. I can look at aspects of my own life as being, or periods of my own life, I should say, of being real like experience junkie driven. Like I want intensities, I want highs, I want novelties, I want the edge, the feeling of the edge, fears that must be overcome, things, the unknown. All of these sorts of elements can have a kind of a very attractive quality, but it's also important to sort of reframe experience and even what experience can get you. I remember very much a Buddhist practitioner I know, and we were talking about, he's done all sorts of experiences and experiments and drugs and practices, and he's just at one point we're talking with somebody, he goes, yeah, but it's it's just another experience. And then there's that side of it too, like, oh, that's all kind of what we have, just another. I know what it's like to have an extraordinary experience. I've had extraordinary experiences, but yet I'm still here. I'm kind of confused, puzzled, concerned about dying, afraid of the world. So another experience, okay, sure. I mean, what else are you going to do? But there's a sort of way in which we're both drawn to experience, and it seems to me have something to do with being critically aware of it. And part of it is this very history of why we use this term, why it is so important to us, and why we think there is something like mystical experience. And this has to do, this one version of this story, and it's definitely one of the main kind of stories I learned studying the history of religions in an academic situation where everyone's very critical of all the terms that people use. So a term like spiritual experience, that are like, all right, we gotta historicize this, we gotta critique this, we gotta understand where it comes from. But it's a pretty interesting story. And the basic idea is that if you think of the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, say, that more or less the totality of reality is covered by religious narratives and models and metaphysical ideas. The whole thing. God invents the world. You can see patterns of the divine in nature. So even using reason to analyze and understand the patterns of nature is a participation in God's ideas, God's plan, God's imagination. And then you get science kicks in, and people start to recognize that you can develop extremely robust and predictive explanations of natural phenomena without having to invoke any weird, spooky religious ideas. And that actually works out, pretty well a lot of the time. And so the Bible might say the earth's 6,000 years old. You start actually looking at the rocks. You're like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense now, does it? And so you start to develop an explanatory realm with a lot of good evidence, as well as good, clear, logical mechanisms to justify the reasoning processes. And you let loose a process that develops, late 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century. And as it rolls through the West, more and more of the previously religious totality of reality gives way to scientific explanations. So now it's harder and harder to locate God in the natural world. I mean, you might still have a belief that God set the whole thing in motion, like a watchmaker who, like, he set it all up and wound it up, and now it's just kind of running on its own. But that's a different kind of God. And after a while, you don't really need that anymore either. So from a religious point of view, and I don't mean religion in the sense simply as a form of social control or an ideology or a myth that justifies social strata or whatever, or in that kind of more critical sense of the term. But I mean like religion, like wrestling with the big juicy questions, the spiritually informed religious worldview that sees the profound value of wrestling with God, engaging with God or with spirit. So it's looking out and it's seeing the totality of reality being colonized more and more by scientific explanations that don't need any supernatural or religious foundation to explain them. And this is already happening before you hit Darwin. And once you get Darwin, wow, then what are you going to say? Then even our own psychologies can be understood as products of natural evolution. So somewhere along the way in the 19th century, the early 19th century, some theologians start talking about experience. And one of the reasons they talk about experience is because in our hearts, in the part of us that is moved to tears by a religious ritual, or the part of us that feels depraved with sin and then makes a turn and feels liberated by the conviction that Jesus loves us, that phenomenological part of us is a lot harder to completely deny than the age of the geology of the planet. In other words, as science colonizes reality with its explanations, one of the last redoubts of religion is an experience. So experience starts to become very important category for religious and spiritual people to that's where you can still hang out and have prophetic dreams, have God whisper in your ear, experience the supernatural, experience the divine, have synchronicities, all of this kind of material that we're all sort of familiar with as like interesting things that can happen, fun things have happened, things that have marked us, things that have called us forward, have all been located in a particular place, a place of experience. And then that shift towards experience gets concretized or underscored greatly with, at least in America or the West, really, because it was a very influential book, in William James's book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is kind of like the influential book certainly about religious experience, but about religion in a lot of ways in the 20th century. because it comes out just at the very beginning of the 20th century. And there he sort of says, this is where the action is. Religion, he's explicit about it. Religion is not about dogma. It's not about organizations. It's not about collectivities. Religion is about the experiences, emotions, and ideas of the individual as they wrestle with the fundamental questions of life. I'm paraphrasing there. He has a nice definition in his own terms. And that shift towards the individual is already a very, very interesting point, because it's making the point that a religious or spiritual worldview that is based on experience also tends to individualize. And in a way, that's the new age. That's spiritual seeking. That's, hey, I can go out and have experiences of all. I can take some ayahuasca and go to a Sufi retreat and meditate and do lots of yoga and like go through this kind of world of experiences, all of which are kind of speaking to me directly. And I don't really, doesn't matter so much whether I'm doing it in the context of a church or not. It doesn't really matter so much if I'm doing it in context of a established, teaching modality, like going up the levels of a particular religious organization and going deeper into their particular pedagogy. So in a way, we're all in this weird unfolding story about experience. And of course, one of the other interesting twists on the term is that depending on how you want to define science, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, but one of the ways of doing it, the empiricist way of doing it, is like, look, we can have experiences under controlled circumstances that themselves can be replicated so that other people can have the same experiences, and we can go, yeah, I had that experience. And they go, yeah, I had that experience. And then you go, okay, we know something now. So even though the form of scientific knowledge is not experiential, in fact, you can say that the brilliance of scientific method is precisely to hedge or to tamp down our tendency to misunderstand our own experience by objectifying it. At the root of it, you need organized human experience. You need a trust, faith that you boil it all down, you're going to get these replicable experiences. It's more complicated than that, because you can get in theories and you can, understand, you can have very elaborate theories about how we can't know things and et cetera, et cetera. So it obviously gets complicated, but there's an interesting similarity that I think a lot of us have probably found ourselves playing with, which is that even if we're pursuing, let's call, outlandish experiences, the experiences of a healthy dose of ayahuasca, that there's an aspect of our encounter that is very similar to a kind of spirit of inquiry or a spirit of empirical inquiry. James is also known for the sort of idea of what he called radical empiricism. So this is an idea, not just that empiricism is a way for science to come up with general claims about how the world is going to work over time for everybody, but to say, well, no, there's something in experience itself. So even if the experience is outlandish, something is happening there. It's part of reality. And it doesn't exactly, it might not be the way that it seems. If I have the subjective experience of being abducted by aliens, that by no means means that the aliens are really there, or at least really there the way that, double-decker buses are. So it's not like experience holds its own authenticating function, but it does seem to point to something is happening here. And that's partly why I'm interested in how on the one hand, we go deeper and deeper into our own experience, but we also develop personal, intellectual, historical ways of kind of taking a step away from that, of understanding how experience itself can be fabricated. And here we can go into all sorts of psychological studies and illusions and ideas today about confirmation bias is a great, so that's sort of a general cognitive psychological idea that has been part of popular discourse for a while now and has a lot of good reasons to pay attention to it. That just cognitively, we have a tendency to see support for our own pre-existing prejudices and ideas that will filter reality so that we get confirmed in our already existing biases. And it's super easy to prove this with psychological studies. And one of the reasons that probably most of us have come across this idea already is that it's a real problem. And so it's good to get the word out that cognitive bias is a real problem, because it helps situations where there's conflict because people have cognitive biases. So there's all these ways in which we also need to distrust our experience. So it puts, a certain kind of seeker in a very interesting place, because on the one hand, we tend to be people that are interested in really pushing the boundaries of experience, becoming very subtle in our meditations, or totally far out in our wild parties, or hardcore in our psychedelic experiences, or even moving in another dimension, people who are deeply into edge experience, like extreme sports, have an edge quality to them, where part of the reason there is because you're actually seeing how you behave at the edge of your capacity, that there's this really extraordinary quality to these experiences. And yet it's also sort of really important, especially if you're doing that kind of work, to develop all sorts of critical ways of understanding and reframing your own experiences. And if you're around psychedelic scenes, you must know people who don't do this. And so they come out of a big experience and they're convinced that they're a reincarnated Aztec deity, or that they're messiahs, or that they've finally seen the answer to the problem. And I'm not saying they didn't see the answer to the problem, but there's something missing when you then take that revelation and insist that everybody else should recognize it. This is something James was very clear at. On the one hand, James wanted to say, mystical experience, it happens. We can even make generalized claims about it. We can say mystical experience tends to be noetic, meaning it's kind of mental, it's ineffable, it's hard to describe, it's transient, doesn't last forever. So we can characterize it. And it's real in that sense. But the fact that you had a mystical experience doesn't give you the right to demand that I believe what you're saying. And he's very clear about that. That's part of this pluralist approach to experience that I think is extremely important and very much my own, which is that we have all these capacities, but we can't know that they are the way they seem to be. So it's important to understand and appreciate and even explore the range of experiences that are possible, while constantly kind of committing to the partial nature of these experiential glimpses. At the most extreme, are there enlightenment experiences that are unlike anything else? Maybe. I haven't had them. There might be certain ways in which there's a limit to what I'm describing. But I think that this sort of getting clearer about what we mean by experience and reflecting on our own in a process way as part of inquiry is a really important thing to do. In fact, that's actually one of I think a good way of thinking about it is to consider the relationship of experience and inquiry. What is this? How do I think about this? How do I integrate it? Why did it happen this way as opposed to that way? that these questions, if they're left to their own devices and you're only in inquiry space, you're just constantly questioning all the time. It's possible to become so disconnected from your raw experience that you're not really able to be there for whatever's happening. So to my mind, it involves both a trust in our capacity to have experiences that are meaningful, to develop the capacity to actually experience the world itself in a richer and more interesting way, more intimate way as we go forward, and at the same time to insist on the dimension of inquiry, our own inquiry, and then especially our commitment to groups where people are honestly attempting to grapple with these issues. Because in this way, it's not totally unlike science. It might not be a fact that I can objectify, but I can have a set of experiences that some of you recognize, and you dealt with them in certain ways, and I dealt with them in certain ways. But by being committed to a certain way of talking about them, that we create a collective context that can both catch us when we're perhaps misinterpreting or going down a certain excessive path, but we also build up a shared language or a shared mode of exploration that prevents it from becoming completely, singular or individualized. I'm just thinking I keep thinking of this, maybe because I mentioned this thing about being abducted by aliens. Is I had this really peculiar experience where, I have I'm pretty, I have a pretty developed analytical skill set, but at the same time, I'm kind of like naive and easily manipulated. Like I'm hypnotizable and like I have weird experiences. And I realized I was reading all these books about alien abduction and stuff. And then I realized that I had like a number of experiences that if I was a different kind of person, were totally enough to build into an interpretation that I totally had been, hosed by the aliens. And I was like, God, that's so interesting. Like I had this dream that wasn't really like a dream. And then that one thing that like, wait, that was a Men in Black actual experience. I just didn't really know that. And then when I was a kid, I saw this one thing and this stuff about owls. Like I had all the raw material to build it into that narrative. But because I'm the way I am, where I'm kind of skeptical, critical, inquiry, whatever, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that thing. That's that pattern making. That's that narratizing that is beautiful, delicious part of us, but it's also, dangerous, or it also can take over the show, right? So yeah, that was kind of like a riff, and I'm interested in talking, to hearing about how people think about both the category of experience in your life, but then also just the way you relate to your own desire for experiences. I mean, I practice meditation. If somebody said, "Yeah, man, you're never gonna have a big blast. This is it." That kind of like sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a little sleepy, sometimes it's kind of fuzzy. Once in a while you get really calm. That's it. You're not no Satori, no, that's it for the rest of your life. I'm like, oh man, I want that. I want some big glimpses. I've had a few. I want some more. I got to be clear about that. Do I think it's going to save me? Not really. Certainly not going to save me from suffering, from death, from losing everything that I love. And I mean, what's going to be worse than that? So, I don't think I have any illusions about its great power, and yet, it's a very important part of my life. But I don't want that desire to totally lead either. To have it be all experience or nothing, because over a life, it feels like part of what we also do then is develop a way of living with how experiences come and go, how experiences you think are going to be bad are good, how even the good experiences are disappointing, or they have different effects than you predict. So actually, there's a whole way of living in relation to experience, but no longer questing within its drive. That I think is very interesting, particularly for people who are attracted to this stuff. So I have a meditation, but because I kind of raised all this stuff up, let's just see if anybody has any burning comments at the moment, and then we can, if not, it's fine. We can do the meditation and then just come back to it later, when I will ask Kayla about the owls. All right, nobody's chomping at the bit. No problem. Great. So let's sit. You're welcome to turn off camera. Make it easier. Sit on the floor if you want to. Find a nice seat. Just take a few natural, easy breaths and check in with yourself. Just how are you feeling? Like, don't make anything happen. How are you feeling? Body, heart, thought. Don't try to do anything with it. Just recognize it, taste it. Now allow and invite calmer breath into the picture. As you breathe, allow the exhale in particular to invite the stress to leave. So you're settling the body with the exhale. Try to make sure that your spine is tall without being stiff. Your shoulders rolled back comfortably, so your chest is slightly open. Your chin modestly tucked in, so the back of your neck opens up. And if you can, roll your pelvis forward just a bit, so you have that natural opening in the lower spine. And you don't have to hold any of these stiffly, but you'll find over time that probably that they are the most comfortable, crisp way of holding your body as you relax. Once you feel like you have a nice established posture, just return to the breath. Just don't focus on it too much. Just stay with it. Feel it moving in and out. If it makes sense to just sense it right on the nostrils or in the throat or in the belly, that's fine. But really open up to the whole process of breathing. Here we're using the breath less as a object to keep your mind focused and more as a place to feel, like you're really sensing into the breath, and trust yourself to sense into the parts that are the most lively for you. Again, it might be some very narrow, subtle point. It might be the whole breathing process. Wherever you are, as you follow the breath, feeling the breath, sensing into the breath, widen the field of sensation, of feeling. See if you can sense into the whole breath without worrying about what exactly that means. Perhaps you can feel breathing all through the body. Perhaps it's still mostly localized, but stay with the feeling and allow it to expand where it wants to. If that gets too vague and you lose the thread, just return to following the breath in a narrow focus. If you find yourself distracted or restless, again, just allow your exhale to remove those tensions. You can almost imagine the exhale taking them away. So even the restlessness, which can be frustrating, becomes part of the meditation as you allow these fluctuations to follow the exhale out of your body mind. Feel your way into the whole cycle of the breath, and note in particular what happens at the end of the exhale. Is there a natural pause there before the inhale begins? Doesn't have to be. But as your breath slows, that space tends to open up. And as you follow the breath, ask yourself, what happens when the breath stops for those few moments between the exhale and the inhale? As you feel your way into the breath, sensing your way into the breath, not thinking about it as an object, but feeling it, even tasting it, enjoying it. And still ask yourself, what happens in those moments? Where does that feeling, tasting go? Do you sense it elsewhere in your body? In this very concrete way, attention on the breath grows into attention in a more general way on just what's happening beyond the breath. So play with that a bit. Sensing into the breath, feeling into the breath, but allowing it to open beyond into your body, into feelings of energy, into the feeling of feeling, because we don't just feel something, we feel. Continue to be in touch with the breath, but allow it to become less and less the central focus. Really, what you're tuning into now is that ambient field within which the breath is moving. Again, for some of us, it's going to feel very much like our body. For others, it might be a sense, a kind of field of energy. It may be light. It may be a sense of spaciousness. We'll just take a few moments to sort of settle into this field that the breath led you to. You may note something, a certain tension between searching for this feeling and feeling the feeling. When we sit like this, particularly when someone is describing things in language, these become objects that the mind seeks. But right next door to that process, there's something like settling into feeling directly. And one can even oscillate gently between the cognitive and sensory. So as you settle into this feeling, this energetic presence, you can probe it a bit. You can even say, hunt for your heartbeat. Is that in the field? Was it there and I didn't notice it? Is it there now only because of a suggestion? Do I hear heartbeat, feel it? And then when you've been probing and thinking a bit about how this is all unfolding, release it and settle back into what you're feeling. The feelingness of that energetic presence. I suspect where most of you are, there's some external sounds, probably. Maybe there's air currents, maybe there's smells, something external to the body. If you can find such a thing, see if you can feel the way that that external sign is related to this energetic presence. So the sound of the car arises. Where did it arise? Is it outside the field or inside the field? A creation of the field? If you don't have something or this doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. What I'm suggesting is that this encounter with this fundamental sense of energetic presence as something embodied, but also something in consciousness, something that is felt like an electrical current is felt. That this basis can be a place from which to explore all of your experience, not as something that is happening out there, but as it were an expression of this very field. So once again, connect to that sense of energetic presence and then allow everything that arises, a sound, a feeling in the body, even a thought in the mind, and see if you can recognize how those experiences emerge from or in relation with this energetic presence. This sense of energetic presence is like a very sensitive instrument that can sense into the totality of your experience. And yet it's very basic. It's just here, just the signature of life in your body, the base of your mind, kind of gentle buzz. Working this way, as we touch into the sense of energy in the body and in the meditating mind, it opens a whole world of moving and playing with these energies. Tonight, I just want to wrap up with one basic gesture, which is to feel your way into this field and then intentionally draw it into your heart, in the body, in the chest. Draw the sense of energetic presence into this space. And you might feel it that way. It might be a little more abstract, but just give it a shot. And you're welcome to move your body a little bit if it helps to sort of locate that energetic center. And return to the breath that we started off with, but now you're breathing in and out of this heart center, which might be feeling, tingling, vibrating. Now, as you exhale, instead of just letting your restless thoughts ride the breath out, allow that sense of energy to expand into the room. So if you're breathing out this energy and it's filling all the space around you, you're bathing in it. All right, allow everything to Let's slowly and gently open your eyes if they're closed. Get a sense of how the room sits around you, how your body sits in the room, how you sit in your body. And then let's just end the meditation.